cost and expenditures as well, and that's what delivery system reform is all about.
Would the Senator yield for a question?
Yes, I will.
Isn't the heart of this what you said a moment ago, which is that there is an area that actually touches on a lot of health care, it's a big area, where you can do two things at once. You can save significant money for taxpayers and insurance ratepayers, and at the same time, you can improve the quality of care that people receive. So often in legislative matters, it's a zero-sum game. One wins, so the other has to lose exactly by the same amount. This isn't like that. This is a win-win situation, and so there really should be energetic efforts to pursue these win-win opportunities.
Well, I thank you, Mr. President. I thank the Senator for Rhode Island for that question, and I think that his charts just pointed to the fact, and he was articulating the fact that everybody's arguing about the website, and as somebody who's been involved in a software company that wrote code, I mean, it's very unfortunate about what's happened, but writing code and fixing that is a straightforward task that can be achieved. It's a little less difficult than cleaning up oil in the Gulf or something of a more large environmental impact. So to me, we'll get that fixed. But in the meantime, there's a lot of things that have to happen that need to change in our delivery system that are about saving costs, delivering better quality care, that we know are proven successful answers to this puzzle. And we need to get more than just these states to take us up on this offer. We need to get CBO to actually give us a score on how much money this has the potential of saving, and then we have to figure out a way to incent all other states to implement this as soon as possible. When you think about our senior population, this is what they want. They want to stay at home as long as possible. It's so much cheaper per Medicaid beneficiary to do this. So this is what we have to achieve. We hope that by coming out here and educating people about the various things in the Affordable Care Act, the things in delivery system reform that are on the agenda to improve access and help save costs will start taking hold, and we'll get more people talking about these solutions. But this is absolutely the direction we need to go.
So if I could ask the Senator another question, in response to what you just said, not only is it a win-win being lower cost and better quality care, but I believe the Senator said that there's actually a third win here. There's the win of lower cost, there's the win of better quality care, but for seniors there's a huge win of maintaining your independence and being able to stay at home. It's hard to put a price on that, but if you're facing the choice of having to leave your home and having to go to a more restrictive health care setting, being able to stay home is a very, very big plus. And so really it's not win-win, it's win-win-win.
Well, Mr. President, I thank the Senator for running. He's correct. There are the individuals who win. The state, in this case, saves Medicaid dollars, and the federal government saves dollars as well. But the individual, if you ask them, this is their choice. They want to stay at home. Nobody says they want to go into nursing care. We appreciate the nursing home care delivery aspect of health care, and they deal with some of the most complex patients, but they don't need to deal with people that don't need to be there. But we have to have a delivery system that helps support community-based care for long-term care. And I hope that we will get more support for these ideas, and that we will help figure out a way to get a score for them as well, because I think that part of the mystery in this whole issue of health care savings is figuring out ways to take things that they're not so complex in what they are doing, moving from nursing home care to community-based care. $1,200 versus $1,600, that's not the hard part of the equation. What's hard is getting CBO to estimate, or if you would guesstimate, how many different states would take that up, how much population would be affected. But we know this. If you just take the number of seniors that are to be affected as the baby boomer population reaches that retirement age and reaches, if you think they're going to be supported primarily by nursing home care, and I think I'm correct that our state has now made the shift the majority of our people who are on Medicaid are taken care of by long-term care services in the community if they're seeking those services, versus the federal numbers are just the opposite. The majority of people seeking those Medicaid long-term care dollars at the average of federal states are more towards nursing home care. So we need to flip that. And if you're right, then it would be a win-win-win situation for all of us. So I, again, thank the Senator for Rhode Island for his leadership on this issue.
Mr. President, in responding to what Senator Cantwell just said about the Congressional Budget Office, it indeed has been frustrating and bedeviling to run up against their inability to project these savings in a way that would allow us to, what we call in Washington, score them and get budget credit for them. But I would say that even though they have that difficulty, there are some very, very serious organizations that project that very significant savings of this kind that I've mentioned, the $1 trillion savings, are possible. The President's own Council of Economic Advisors some years ago estimated that we could do savings of $700 billion a year without affecting the quality of care in any way for the worse. The National Institutes of Medicine have made several regular projections on this. The most recent one is at $750 billion a year. Well, the Institutes of Medicine are pretty serious folks, and they're entitled to respect when they say that we can have those kind of savings. Rand Corporation, a lot of people know a lot about. It's a very, very expert organization. They actually have done two things. They've looked at what we can save in health care, and then they've looked at what we can save in health care plus an additional bit for dealing with waste and fraud. And they gave ranges for the two. The midpoint of the range for savings is about $730 billion. And if you add their suggestions on waste and fraud, the midpoint of their range goes to about $910 billion a year. And the Lewin Group, which is another respected think tank that looks at health care issues, some time ago wrote a piece with George Bush's former Treasury Secretary. And they said it was $1 trillion. So is it $700 billion a year? Is it $750 billion a year? Is it somewhere between $730 and $910 billion a year, depending on how you score the waste and fraud? Is it $1 trillion a year? Either way, I'll take it. Those are big numbers, and wherever it falls in that range, we should be energetically fighting for it. And I will close with the request that I always make in these speeches, and this is a request to the President and to his administration, and that is to inspire us. Set a bold national target. Sure, CBO and OMB and our actuarial and accounting organizations can't predict what these savings are going to be, but by gosh, the President can direct his administration to target a savings goal and to go after it. And I think that if the President were to set a hard date and dollar target for delivery system savings in a couple of years out, give us a chance to get to work and do that, that would make a big difference. And the example that I use is of President Kennedy. Back in 1961, when it looked like we were losing the space race to the Soviet Union, President Kennedy declared that within 10 years, he put a date on it, he would put a man on the moon and bring him back safely, a hard target, something specific that you would know whether it was achieved or it wasn't achieved. The message was clear, the mission that was outlined was clear, and the result was a vast mobilization of private and public resources to achieve that purpose. It is not enough to talk about bending the health care cost curve. That catchphrase should be jettisoned and discarded. We should have a hard date and dollar figure, and that should be a target that the entire administration aims toward. Had President Kennedy given that speech back in 1961 and declared as his purpose to bend the curve of space exploration, I very much doubt we would have put that man on the moon within 10 years. It was his exercise of presidential leadership, ahead of what the scientists knew could be done, but with confidence and faith in our ability to achieve big things. It was that challenge that put the executive branch of government into focus to achieve exactly what he had directed. We can do the same with health care. We should do the same with health care. There's no downside to it because this is a win-win area, as I discussed with Senator Cantwell. And so on that note, I will yield the floor and suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
What I'm trying to do, Mr. President, we were told to come down here. We had a 4 o'clock time. Glad to be able to discuss things earlier. So what I would like to talk about, with the Chair's permission, is to talk about the military retiree provisions.
Senator may proceed.
Thank you. Number one, I want to say to our Budget Chairman, you had a really good discussion, I think she's gone now, with Senator Chambliss and Isaacson about trying to figure a way to fix this provision in the budget deal. I'm very disappointed that we can't have an amendment to fix it or amendments to do other things, and but we are where we are. So the bottom line, this has been a healthy exercise because all of us are looking at provision. This is a bipartisan product, so it's not about blaming Democrats or Republicans. It's a good exercise. How could a bill, and one, this bill, as we all know, doesn't fund the government. If we pass the budget, and I'm sure it will pass here eventually, it doesn't keep the government open. It sets limits on spending. We're increasing the amount we can spend on defense and non-defense, setting some sequestration aside. That's a great thing. I think that's going to be good. How we pay for it is the problem. And the question is, how did this happen? You know, the chairman of the Senate Budget Committee and the chairman in the House are great folks. The military retiree provision is a pay-for that has got everybody a bit wondering. And upon a second evaluation is probably certainly not the right thing to do. In May 2014, there will be a commission that was set up by the Congress to tell us how best to reform military pay and benefits, because they are unsustainable, quite frankly, in the future. But we put in that commission report a requirement that any reform could not affect those who are in the service now, their grandfathers.
It's an important call. I apologize, Mr. President. I ask that the quorum call be lifted.
Without objection.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President. I asked my colleague from Rhode Island to stay on the floor for just a couple of minutes because I wanted to thank him for the really erudite and eloquent explanation he has just given for why our focus should be so aggressively and unrelentingly on the tremendous opportunities for saving health care costs and raising health care quality at the same time. And I'm very proud to have joined him and others of our colleagues in a task force or group that is seeking common sense solutions to lower the cost of health care and at the same time increase its efficiency and quality. The two go together. The phenomenon that he just discussed of reducing readmissions to hospitals once patients are discharged also means that the quality of those discharges and rehabilitation plans and handoffs to primary physicians and suffering and pain to those individuals, patients, is reduced. And that is just in microcosm one example of how this goal can be accomplished. We are late in this year, and we have no real time remaining before the end of that year to do legislatively the kinds of reforms that will help advance this ball. But the attention that we need to devote to this issue is clearly beyond this year and beyond the next year. We are making progress. The graphs show it. But there is so much more progress to be made in extending lifespans and quality of life, as well as reducing the cost of health care and making sure that we seize this historic moment to show the rest of the world that we can do better and that we will do better in providing health care delivery. The cause of health care delivery reform is one that cries out for a focused effort involving both branches of our government, executive and legislative, and both parties, as well as both houses of this legislature. And I think that the kind of focus given by Senators Cantwell and Whitehouse so penetratingly and powerfully today is the kind of focus that we should maintain. I hope in the days or months ahead that we will devote more attention coming to the floor, doing events in our states, making sure in meetings that the administration is aware of our concern, and I look forward to continuing that effort in that time ahead. And again, I want to thank my colleague, Senator Whitehouse, as well as others like Senator Schumer and my colleague from Connecticut, Senator Murphy, as well as Senator Cantwell, for that kind of effort that they are devoting, and I'm very proud to be working with them. Mr. President, I see colleagues on the floor. It's late in the day, and I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Mississippi.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would point out that the distinguished senator from Delaware was on his way to speak and has graciously offered to defer for just a moment or two while I make my brief remarks. I rise this evening to speak briefly about the delegation chosen by President Obama to represent the United States at the opening and closing ceremonies of the 2014 Olympic Winter Games in Sochi, Russia. I would also like to offer a few suggested additions to the delegation. As members know, Janet Napolitano, our former Secretary of Homeland Security, will lead the U.S. delegation to the opening ceremonies on February 7th. Our Deputy Secretary of State, William Burns, will lead our delegation to the closing ceremonies on February 23rd. Our two delegations also will include tennis legend Billie Jean King, gold medalist figure skater Brian Boitano, gold medalist figure skater Bonnie Blair, silver medalist hockey player Caitlin Cahow, and Olympic gold medalist speed skater Eric Hayden. These individuals are American sports figures who should be lauded for their contributions. I'm confident they will represent us well. May I suggest with all seriousness that this delegation could well be expanded. Some have asked what message the President might be trying to send to Russia in choosing this delegation. White House Press Secretary Jay Carney asserted this morning that in the selection of this delegation we are sending the message that the United States is a diverse place. Mr. President, whether we are sending a message or simply pointing to our diversity, I submit our official delegation would be enhanced by adding the following: an American citizen of Russian parentage, perhaps a Russian orphan adopted and raised to adulthood by loving parents in the United States, would be a good addition to this delegation, or a Syrian American who has fled the barbaric and treacherous rule of Bashar al-Assad in Syria. In addition, an Iranian American exiled from the oppressive and murderous regime in Iran might make an outstanding addition to this delegation. I would also suggest that Lieutenant General Keith Alexander, the director of the National Security Agency in this administration, would be an appropriate representative also of the United States of America. So whether it is messaging that is taking place here or simply diversity, I strongly suggest that this outstanding delegation could be improved by these individuals and perhaps others. I thank you, Mr. President, and I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Delaware.
Mr. President, good evening. I'd like to talk tonight on maybe two subjects. The first of those is the budget resolution, that the bipartisan, bicameral budget resolution conference report that we have approved here today. This is the first time in a number of years that we've actually been able to debate and find some consensus on a bipartisan blueprint for spending for the balance of this fiscal year. I want to commend Senator Murray. I want to commend Congressman Ryan for their work and for their leadership and their willingness to find the middle. My wife and I celebrate our 28th anniversary in about 2 weeks. Actually, it's a few minutes after midnight on New Year's Day. And one of the things I love to do when I talk to people that have been married a lot longer than we have is to ask them the secret for being married a long time. And I've heard all kinds of answers, hilarious answers, some very poignant answers. Best answer I've ever heard, Mr. President, is the answer is the two C's. The two C's. And the first time someone said that to me, I said, well, what are the two C's? And they said, communicate and compromise. Communicate and compromise. And as it turns out, that is not just the secret for a long marriage between two people, but it's also the secret for a vibrant democracy. And if we're to continue to thrive as a nation and to meet our responsibilities here, it will be by doing what our leaders on the budget committees have done. And that is communicated at great length with one another, developed a sense of trust with one another, an understanding of the other's views, and being willing to compromise and finding a way to the middle. Everyone here could fault some aspect of the agreement that was struck. I can. I know others can. But I want to commend them and thank them for the effort that went into getting this far. My colleague, presiding officer, has heard me say once or twice in the last year or so that there are three key ingredients to making real progress, major progress on deficit reduction. And one of those is entitlement reform that saves the programs for future generations, saves money, and does not savage old people or poor people. The second is tax reform that helps us lower some of the corporate rates a bit and also generates revenues for deficit reduction. And the third element is the notion of looking at everything that we do in federal government, everything we do, and ask this question, how can we get a better result for less money or the same amount of money? And as we approach the next budget resolution next spring, the next opportunity to revisit these issues of spending, domestic spending, defense spending, entitlement spending, and revenues, my hope is that we will be able to make even greater progress by focusing also on those three critical elements. That's one of the things I want to say, Mr. President. The other thing I'd like to talk about actually is a person that I want to talk about tonight, and that is a fellow named Alejandro Mayorkas. He's been nominated by the President to serve as the Deputy Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security. He was nominated some 8 months ago. And Mr. President, as you may recall, I have the privilege of chairing the Committee of Jurisdiction over Homeland Security. It's a Committee on Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs, and we're responsible for working with the administration. And we're also responsible for working with a lot of other folks in this country and outside of this country to help protect our nation's security both at home and abroad. And at the same time, we strive on our committee to make sure that federal agencies work better, work smarter, work more efficiently with the resources that we entrust to them. We're an oversight committee. During my years of public service, I've learned that the most important ingredient in enabling organizations to work well is leadership. That is the case both in government and the private sector, in organizations large and small. And part of our shared responsibility here, Mr. President, is ensuring that we have effective leaders in place across our federal government. It is every senator's constitutional role to provide advice and consent on the President's nominees in a thorough and timely manner as part of the Senate's confirmation process. And while we in Congress hope to soon wrap up our 2013 session, it's going to be with far less to show than many of us would have liked. But at least the Senate will have had an opportunity to fill some key leadership positions across the federal government and to confirm a number of judges, in many cases in courts where they need a judge or two. And one of the roles that needs to be filled again is that of Deputy Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security. This department, as we know, Mr. President, plays a critical role in protecting our nation and its citizens from harm. And whether the threat relates to terrorism from abroad, to homegrown extremists, to cyber attacks or natural disaster, this department and the folks who work there are on the front line for us. Because of the department's significant role in the security of our country, I've been very concerned for many months about the high number of senior-level vacancies at the Department of Homeland Security. In fact, the department has been without a Senate-confirmed Deputy Secretary since April, and without a Senate-confirmed Secretary since, I think, late last summer. Earlier this week, we took an important step to address this problem by voting to confirm Jay Johnson, a good man, as the next Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security with an overwhelming bipartisan vote. I want to thank our Republican colleagues for joining us in that vote. Now, that's good news, but we should not stop there. We need to ensure that Secretary Johnson has a Senate-confirmed leadership team in place, and that certainly includes Ali Mayorkas as his deputy. This evening, I want to take just a few minutes, if I could, Mr. President, to take some time to speak in strong support of the nomination of Director Mayorkas' nomination and explain why I'm convinced that he's one of the leaders that we urgently need at the Department of Homeland Security. As of this week, more than 8 months have passed since former Deputy Secretary Jane Hall-Lute stepped down from her post at DHS. And nearly 6 months have passed since the President nominated Alejandro Mayorkas, currently the Director of U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, for that post. It's time to put in place Senate-confirmed leadership in this very important Deputy Secretary position. The former Deputy Secretary, the last Senate-confirmed Deputy Secretary for this department, was a woman named Jane Hall, a very impressive woman, very able leader in her own right, widely respected not just by members of the committee, but by many of our colleagues, Democrat and Republican, in the Senate, for her leadership, for her management skills, for her expertise, for her candor. She helped DHS make strides in many areas, for example, in narrowing the operational and management issues identified as high risk by the Government Accountability Office. Ever since the Department of Homeland Security was created, it has been on the high-risk list every other year by GIO. They put it out at the beginning of every Congress, and one of the leaders, if you will, in terms of getting a lot of mentions in the high-risk list is the Department of Homeland Security. And one of the criticisms of the department for the last 10 years is they never passed a financial audit. Well, they're supposed to under a law passed roughly 20 years ago. And little by little, every federal agency, except the Department of Defense, has become auditable and then finally achieved a clean audit. And this week, we learned, last week rather, we learned the Department of Homeland Security, within really 10 years or so, finally has achieved that goal. Why is that important? Because what we can't measure, we can't manage. And this is a big department spread out across the country, 22 disparate agencies, hundreds of thousands of employees, and they need to be well managed, And one of Jane Hall-Luke's accomplishments, along with Janet Napolitano, our former secretary, was to make them auditable and to get them a clean audit. I think it's safe to say that the department needs somebody with the same kind of commitment and willingness to tackle problems head-on that Jane Hall-Luke brought to the job. Similarly, Director Mayorkas understands and is well prepared to tackle these management challenges and is committed to continuing these reform efforts needed to move the department forward. Director Mayorkas has a distinguished record of leadership in public service. In fact, he's been confirmed by the Senate not once but twice. First as U.S. Attorney for the Central District of California, the youngest U.S. attorney in the country at the time, and again in his current capacity as leader of the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. He's also served as a partner at a major U.S. law firm, O'Melveny and Myers. Director Mayorkas has a long and distinguished record in law enforcement. As an assistant U.S. attorney, he aggressively prosecuted drug traffickers, human smugglers, and violent criminals. As U.S. Attorney, Mr. Mayorkas led the largest federal judicial system in the United States and was appointed by then U.S. Attorney General Janet Reno to serve on her Advisory Committee on Ethics and Government. Moreover, while a partner at O'Melveny and Myers, he served as chair of the firm's Values Committee. He was a recipient of the firm's annual Values Award. Since his confirmation by voice vote by the Senate in 2009, Director Mayorkas has served as Director of U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services since 2009. He skillfully led the largest immigration system in the world. In this capacity, Director Mayorkas has been responsible for an 18,000-member workforce that maintains more than 200 offices worldwide and is supported by a $3 billion budget. And Director Mayorkas has led the efforts to turn around an agency that was widely considered to be foundering. He's helped to put it on the path to professionalism and to competence. His first action after being confirmed several years ago was to order a top to bottom review of the agency, identify its strengths, identify its weaknesses. When the review concluded, Director Mayorkas became concerned that Citizenship and Immigration Services was prioritizing speed over security when it came to processing visa applications. And in order to make sure that national security concerns were getting the proper attention, he created an entire new directorate responsible for policing visa issuance, reporting directly to him. And this ensured that national security professionals would have a seat at the management table and a voice in all major decisions. Director Mayorkas has proved that he's an exceptional manager during his time at U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. Let me give you a couple of concrete examples, Mr. President, of how he's made the agency more effective. He dramatically improved what I believe is one of the most important programs in all of DHS, and that is E-Verify. This is a voluntary program that allows employers to check whether prospective employees are eligible to work in the United States. I was pleasantly surprised to learn that under Director Mayorkas' leadership, the number of employers using E-Verify tripled from 156,000 employers in 2009 to almost 500,000 today. The number of people processed by E-Verify also increased from nearly 9 million to over 20 million people. And that's remarkable improvement in this important program. His implementation last year of the President's Deferred Actions for Childhood Arrivals program, a hugely complicated and challenging undertaking that brought hundreds of thousands of people out of the shadows, has also been widely praised. Within 60 days, Director Mayorkas managed to implement a program that processed hundreds of thousands of people while ensuring that the appropriate security checks were performed. I think it's a stunning achievement. Here's something else I found interesting. Just yesterday, the Partnership for Public Service issued its rankings of the best places to work in the federal government in 2013, just yesterday. On the one hand, I was dismayed to find out the Department of Homeland Security ranked last on their list of cabinet departments. However, U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, led by Ali Mayorkas, was one of the highest-ranked components within the Department of Homeland Security, coming in, I think, at 76 out of some 300 federal agencies. And after Alejandro Mayorkas took over in 2009, employee satisfaction with senior leadership didn't drop. It increased by over 20%. We need more of that kind of proven and committed leadership at DHS. Mr. President, everything I've learned about Director Mayorkas over the past year, and I've learned a lot, has led me to conclude that he is an exceptional candidate to be the next Deputy Secretary at this department. But just don't take my word for it. Director Mayorkas has received glowing accolades from a number of our colleagues who have worked closely with him. I might also say he's been strongly endorsed by every single former secretary of this department, every one of them. 2 appointed by George W. Bush and 1 by our current president. They've all endorsed him. He's also been endorsed by a number of our colleagues, Mary Landrieu, who knows him well, a valued member of our committee, Dianne Feinstein from California, who recommended Director Mayorkas for his positions in both as U.S. Attorney out there to President Clinton and to President Obama for his current leadership position. We've also received dozens of letters from a distinguished bipartisan group of individuals and organizations asking us to move forward with this nomination. I just want to take a minute or two, if I could, right now, just to share with our colleagues what some of these distinguished people have been saying about Director Alejandro Mayorkas. Among those writing on his behalf are many individuals whom a lot of us deeply respect. I mentioned Jane Holute before, previous Deputy Secretary. Richard Skinner, the last Senate-confirmed Department of Homeland Security Inspector General, who was nominated by former President George W. Bush. I particularly value what Jane Holute has to say, given that she has an unparalleled perspective on what it takes to be an effective Deputy Secretary. She was one herself, and she was terrific. Here's what she said about Director Mayorkas. As I've come to know Ali, I can tell you that he asks no more of others than he asks of himself, and in leading by example, sets a standard of excellence for all who consider themselves committed to public service. In my view, Homeland Security could be in no better hands. That's Jane Holute. In one of 2 support letters, not one but 2 support letters, Richard Skinner, the last Senate-confirmed Inspector General in the Department of Homeland Security, again a Bush appointee, he sent 2 letters to our committee, including one earlier this month. And in it he said this of Ali Mayorkas. He said, quote, "During my tenure as Inspector General, Mr. Mayorkas demonstrated that he possessed the intellectual wherewithal to make objective and oftentimes very tough decisions on complex, multifaceted issues and a genuine commitment to the mission, vision, and core values of the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. He is a strong leader who will be able to bring together diverse interests in collaborative efforts." That's the last Senate-confirmed Inspector General for this department. The list of supporters for Director Mayorkas also includes other senior officials in the George W. Bush administration, such as Kenneth Weinstein, who was President Bush's Homeland Security advisor. And here's what Mr. Weinstein had to say. He said, "Ali has consistently shown an exceptional ability to mobilize, manage, and lead people and organizations. As director of his agency, he has effectively led a large and complex organization during a time of continuing change and challenge. His marked success in that difficult role is a strong predictor of his performance in the Deputy Secretary position." Again, that's what Mr. Weinstein had to say. I could not agree more. Those from the law enforcement community also laud Director Mayorkas. For example, we received strong letters of support from the people charged with securing our borders during the George W. Bush administration: Robert Bonner, Ralph Basham, and Jason Ahern, all of who served as Commissioner of Customs and Border Protection within the Department of Homeland Security. Mr. Bonner wrote this: "It is not merely his willingness to serve the public good that impels me to write this letter to support Ali for his nomination. It is rather my belief that he has the experience, the skills, the talent, the plain old good judgment to be an effective Deputy Secretary, perhaps the best Department of Homeland Security has ever had." And having succeeded Jane Holyoke, that's saying a mouthful. Sir Basham also wrote, Mr. Mayorkas has also served the department well, already served the department well, and honorably in the role of Director of U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. I also believe he continued, Mr. Mayorkas continued to be, I believe Mr. Mayorkas to be a public servant of integrity with a clear and distinguished track record of leadership. And Mr. Ahern, also one of the past commissioners of this department, said these words: "It is my strong opinion that Director Mayorkas' experience and leadership will be invaluable as DHS continues the work of protecting our homeland against threats of all kinds. As the Department of Homeland Security continues to mature, Alejandro Mayorkas is the right leader to continue that development and also meet the many critical mission challenges faced every day." So just think about it. The three most senior border security officials who served under George W. Bush all agreed that Director Ali Mayorkas would make an outstanding Deputy Secretary. They worked with him in many cases. They know him. They've seen him up close and personal. They've watched him lead. But it's not just former DHS officials who feel that way. Chuck Canterbury, the national president of the Fraternal Order of Police, said that Director Mayorkas is, this is a quote, "professionalism, leadership skills, and integrity make him an ideal candidate for this post," close quote. All these individuals who work closely with Director Mayorkas have spoken highly of him. They cite his integrity, his commitment to excellence, and his tenacity. I'll close with this. At his confirmation hearing, Director Mayorkas said that his goal in life has always been to bring honor to his parents. His parents brought him to this country as a refugee from Cuba when he was 1 year old, him and his brothers. They worked hard every day to give him and his brothers the opportunity to go to school and make a better life for themselves. Like his parents, Alejandro Mayorkas has worked hard all of his life. He's worked hard in part to make them proud. I believe that he's brought great honor to them and to this country, and if confirmed, would continue to do so as Deputy Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security. I just urge all of my colleagues to support his nomination. Thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. President.
Assistant Majority Leader.
Mr. President, let me say a word about the statement just made by my colleague from Delaware. Senator Carper and I came to Congress together over 30 years ago in the House of Representatives. He left for a short interlude to become governor of his state. And then I recall making a telephone call to him one day saying, "Would you consider joining me again in the U.S. Senate?" And he was kind enough to do so. And the people of Delaware were wise enough to elect him. I've known him for a long time. Tom Carper is an honorable man, a man of integrity. This is a controversial nomination on the other side of the aisle. There are some who question the integrity of Mr. Mayorkas and his fitness to be chosen for this position. I've met him, makes a very positive impression, and a very strong case that he should continue in public service. But what I respect the most is that my colleague, Senator Tom Carper, chairman of this committee, has gone to extraordinary lengths to investigate every allegation, to answer every question, and to be there to work with the other side of the aisle to try to resolve any problems that they have with this nomination. Sadly, he's not been successful. There's still some on the other side who will oppose him. But I spoke to Senator Reid, the majority leader, earlier this week and said, if Tom Carper believes that Ali Mayorkas is an honorable man, based on his investigation, I trust Tom Carper. I don't believe he would ever mislead the American people, the people of Delaware, or the United States Senate. We should confirm this man. The allegations that have been made against him have not been substantiated and, frankly, should not ruin what is an extraordinary public career and an opportunity for him to continue to serve this nation that he loves. So I thank Tom Carper for his leadership on this, for his integrity and his commitment to fairness to make sure that this man is treated fairly by the United States Senate. Thank you very much, Senator Carper. And, Mr. President, I ask consent that my following statement be placed at a separate place in the record from this earlier statement.
Without objection.
Mr. President, many times in life, we're in a doctor's office. And many times in life, it is a tense, worrisome moment when we're waiting for that doctor to make a diagnosis or to tell us what we need to know about ourselves or someone we love. There are great doctors, and you hope that you're in the room with one at that moment. There are great doctors who are extraordinary surgeons and great researchers, but there are also great doctors who are caring, healing professionals who are there when we need them the most. I'd like to tell a brief story about one of them from my home state of Illinois, who's an exceptional man. Dr. Russell Donor is a family doctor who retired quietly in October at the age of 88. He'd been a practicing family practitioner in Rushville, Illinois, a small farming community in central Illinois, for 58 years. Doc Donor is the only doctor many families in Rushville have ever known. But the longevity of his career is only one small reason that they love him. For many families in Rushville and the neighboring towns, Dr. Donor was a one-man solution to the problem of unaffordable health care. When he started practicing medicine in Rushville in 1955, he charged the going rate for an office visit, $2. In 1970, with an apology, he had to raise his fee. His fee for an office visit was raised to $5, and that's where it stayed for 43 years. If families couldn't pay, Dr. Donor would just quietly signal to his office manager, no charge this time. He never, ever accepted medical insurance payments, said it wasn't worth the bother. In 58 years as Rushville's family doctor, Dr. Donor never took a vacation. He worked 7 days a week. He started each day at the 25-bed local hospital, Culbertson Memorial, where he checked on every single patient in the hospital. At 10 a.m., he was at his office, red brick storefront on the town square, to see his patients. There were no appointments. Dr. Donor saw people in the order they arrived. Years back, he used to see 50 patients a day. His rule was if you were in his office by 5 p.m., he would see you, even if it meant working late into the night. The local pharmacy down the block stayed open until Dr. Donor called to say he'd seen his last patient. That wasn't the end of Dr. Donor's day. After he saw his last patient in his office, he headed back to the hospital. That was his home away from home, as he called it. He ate dinner, went back to the hospital to check on his patients. He made house calls for patients who were too sick or frail to get to his office. He visited his patients in nursing homes. He took off a half day each week, Thursday afternoon. First he went to the local Rotary lunch, and then, back in the day, he might even consider going fishing. The only time anyone in Rushville can remember Doc Donor leaving town was for a medical conference. Now, a few years back, he had quadruple bypass surgery himself. The day he came home from the hospital, he went to work for a few hours. Gary Moreland is a co-owner of the pharmacy down the street from Doc Donor, and he said, healing is more than a dedication or a commitment, it's a calling. Tim Ward, director of the Foundation for Culbertson Memorial Hospital, said of Dr. Russell Donor, simply, quote, he's the closest thing we have to a saint. Doc Donor's staff was just as dedicated as he was. His sister Clarice, who died in April, helped him set up his practice in 1955. She helped him buy his first car so he could make house calls. She managed his office for more than 40 years. Edith Moore, his office assistant, died last July at the age of 85, working right up to the day of her death. Rose Busby, one of Doc Donor's 2 nurses, retired about a year ago in her late 80s. Nurse Florence Bodaroff worked for Dr. Donor for 50 years till he closed his office. She finally quit her nursing career at age 90. Russell Donor grew up on a farm just north of Rushville, outside the little town of Vermont. He says he inherited his work ethic from his parents, who taught their 7 kids the importance of working hard and taking care of others. He was inspired to become a doctor by a town doctor who treated him for seizures when he was a child. After he served in the Army in World War II, he went to Western Illinois University on the GI Bill, and then in the early 1950s, Northwestern University in Chicago, where he went to medical school. He thought he was going to stay in Chicago and be a cardiologist. Instead, he became the heart of a small town. The longtime family doctor in Rushville was retiring persuaded the newly minted Doc Donor to come home just for a year or two to fill the void. Well, the years stretched into decades, and Doc Donor found that he just couldn't leave. There was always somebody who needed a helping hand. The decision to stay in a small town cost him his marriage, but that was all right. Doc Donor said his patients were his family. Like George Bailey in It's a Wonderful Life, it seems that Doc Donor has touched and enriched the lives of almost everyone in his small town. He estimates that he's delivered 3,500 babies, more than the entire current population of the city of Rushville. Among those he brought into the world are Rushville's mayor and half of the staff at the local hospital. He once climbed down in a coal mine to help rescue 4 men. Lynn Stambaugh is the CEO at Culbertson Memorial Hospital. Her younger sister suffered seizures as a baby. She remembers Doc Donor coming to their house and sitting beside her sister's crib all night long to make sure she was going to be okay. Carolyn Ambrosius recalled for a local reporter that her mom became pregnant at the age of 41, and a doctor in Springfield told her that either she was going to survive or the baby would survive, but not both of them. She went home to Rushville in tears, and then she met with Doc Donor. She remembers that Doc told her mother, "God's going to take care of us, and I'm going to help." Doc Donor came to the house every day to check on Carolyn's mom and often stayed to have dinner with the family. Today, Carolyn Ambrosius' baby brother is a healthy, middle-aged man. Family doctors like Doc Donor are a disappearing breed. Only 2% of all medical students in a recent study expressed interest in practicing primary care as a general internist. Most medical students choose a more lucrative specialty field. In the United States, we're now short about approximately 9,000 primary care doctors. The situation's not getting any better. In the next 15 years, we're going to face a shortage of more than 65,000 primary care doctors. Stephanie Lemaster is one of that special 2%, though. Stephanie grew up in Rushville. As a little girl, she wanted to be a nurse, like her mom and her grandmother. At her mother's suggestion, she interviewed Doc Donor for a fourth grade school project. Listening to him talk about his love of doctoring, she changed her plans. Stephanie Lemaster is now a second-year medical student at Southern Illinois University. She says, quote, "They tell me I should be the next Dr. Donor, but I'm not sure I can live up to him. He's the only one like him," end of quote. Dr. Donor has been recognized by state and national organizations as one of the best country doctors in America. He's been profiled in People magazine, featured on the Today Show. He was the Grand Marshal of the Illinois State Fair Parade this year. In September, town of Rushville unveiled a bronze statue of Dr. Donor in the town's Central Park. It's about 200 feet from his old office. The statue depicts Dr. Donor seated on a park bench with a child listening to his heart through a stethoscope. Besides doctoring and a little bit of fishing and the Rotary Club meeting, Doc Donor also loves trees. Rushville Mayor Kurt Lunt estimates the doctor has donated thousands of trees to the town over the years. It's been said that you have to have faith in the future to plant a tree. The trees of Rushville symbolize not just Doc Donor's faith in the future, but also his love for that community that became his family. Retirement is taking some adjustment for Doc Donor. The last time he took a full day off, he was in the Army in World War II. He refused to let the folks of Rushville hold any kind of retirement reception for him or run a story about him in the local newspaper. He said plenty of people retire every day and nobody makes any fuss over it. But few people touch a town as deeply as Dr. Donor, Dr. Russell Donor. He touched Rushville and the other small farm towns around it in such an amazing way. You can be sure this holiday season, as they have for so many years, there are many people who count among their blessings that great Dr. Donor who served Rushville, Illinois, and America for so many decades. Mr. President, I yield the floor. Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent the Help Committee be discharged from further consideration of Senate Resolution 316 and the Senate proceed to its consideration.
Clerk will report.
Senate Resolution 316, supporting the goals and ideals of American Diabetes Month.
Is there objection? Without objection,
I further ask the
Committee's discharged and the Senate will proceed to the measure.
Further ask the resolution be agreed to, the preamble be agreed to, the motions to reconsider be considered, made, and laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of Senate Resolution 324 submitted earlier today by Senator Rockefeller.
Clerk will report.
Senate Resolution 324, expressing the sense of the Senate with respect to the tragic shooting at Los Angeles International Airport on November 1st, 2013, of employees of the Transportation Security Administration.
Is there objection to proceeding to the measure? Without objection.
I further ask the resolution be agreed to, the preamble be agreed to, the motions to reconsider be considered and made and laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the appointments at the desk appear separately in the record as if made by the Chair.
Without objection.
I ask unanimous consent that when the Senate completes its business today and adjourn until 10 a.m. on Thursday, December 19th, 2013, that following the prayer and pledge, the morning hour be deemed expired, the journal of proceedings be approved today, the time for the two leaders be reserved for their use later in the day, and that following any leader remarks, the Senate resume consideration of the motion to concur in the House message to accompany H.R. 3304, the National Defense Authorization Act. Further, that all time during adjournment count post-cloture on the motion to concur.
Without objection.
Mr. President, roll call votes are possible throughout the day. Senators will be notified when they're scheduled, and if there's no further business come before the Senate, I ask that it adjourn under the previous order.
Senate stands adjourned until 10 a.m. tomorrow.
The Senate today passed the 2014 budget agreement hammered out by the House and Senate Budget Committee chairman. It would reduce the deficit by $85 billion and reverse some of the sequester's budget cuts. The House passed the legislation last week, and it now heads to President Obama, who said he plans to sign it. Also today, the Senate moved forward with the 2014 Defense Programs and Policy Bill. It provides $625 billion for the Pentagon. That's $3 billion less than the current year. The bill also includes a 1% increase in military pay, and it changes how the military will handle sexual assault cases. We're expecting a final passage vote in the Senate this week.